So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this third unit and this class on Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. I hope you all can see the text on your screen very clearly. The paper, which you must already be knowing, that British poetry and drama 14th to 17th century, and the third unit is being taught today. This is about Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. Now, like all units, there's an introduction to this. Everyone, please go through this. I'll read it slowly and request everyone to follow the lines. So the author of this play is Christopher Marlowe, who was born in 1564, the same year of Shakespeare. So William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe were contemporaries. They were writing at the same time and were also very close competitors in matters of dramatic excellence. He studied in King's School, Canterbury. You just need to remember these things. It's not important that you have to have all the details, but just know it for the sake of the information. He studied at King's School, Canterbury and Cambridge and received his MA degree in 1584. His first play, Tamburlaine the Great, Part 1, was performed in London the same year, followed by Tamburlaine Part 2. Tamburlaine portrayed a new kind of a hero, a Superman aspiring to conquer everything before him. The most important thing about Christopher Marlowe's plays is that, just give me 1 minute. Sorry, there was a bit of a technical problem, so I hope you all can see me and hear me clearly and also can see the text that is being shared with all of you. So as I was saying that Christopher Marlowe had this habit of writing about superheroes or people with extraordinary potentials. So Tamburlaine was his great play, and Tamburlaine was a king who had actually dreamt of conquering the whole world. So he talks about extraordinary powers in human beings. The man with overreaching ambition was a model for the other plays to follow. More significantly, it established blank verse as the standard literary vehicle for English drama. This was the age of Renaissance, and the play was an immediate success with an audience flushed with exciting stories of the adventures and exploits of its seafarers and explorers. The Jew of Malta, another very famous play by him, came on stage in 1589, followed by Edward II in 1592. Dr. Faustus was performed in 1592-93, 1588-89 have been suggested by some critics. So these are some of his important plays, which I'm not getting into details, and we shall read Dr. Faustus, which is part of your syllabus. Let's get into the background of this play. What the background says, like mostly all of the plays, you should all remember these things and also read it very, very carefully. Like most dramatists of Elizabethan times, Marlowe also borrows the story for Dr. Faustus, pronounced Faustus, from an earlier source. So Dr. Faustus's story has been borrowed from some other story, which also tells about a particular person. This was the legend about the life and death of a German scholar, George or John Faustus, whose public life extended from 1510 to 1540. A fortune teller and a magician, he was reputed to be a proud, arrogant man who had acquired supernatural powers. This is mostly the story about. This is about a person called Dr. Faustus who had tried to conquer death. He wanted to know that what happens to human life after death, and that is the overarching ambition with which this play has been written. Think of a person who has this ambition of knowing about life after death. So this is the kind of hero we are talking about here. Has died at the hands of the devil. a fortune teller and a magician, he was reputed to be a proud, arrogant man who had acquired supernatural powers and, according to legend, had died at the hands of the devil. During his lifetime, he had been accused of the grossest immorality. Grossest immorality means he had done some things that were very, very bad and things that are not acceptable to the contemporary people and had to take flight from punishment. The historical Faustus had indeed died a horrible death by strychnine poisoning, but legend soon grew around his evil life and his horrible death as a punishment for it. Now, this is the story. This is a story about a person called Faustus who had actually thought about knowing about life after death. So this is a very ambitious person. So taking this story, Christopher Marlowe wrote his play and about a scientist who had actually thought about taking things from the others. Historical Fosters had indeed died a horrible death and Satan in exchange. In fact, stories of men selling their souls to Satan in exchange for earthly pleasures that had been current for centuries now came to be associated with Faustus. And thus the legend grew. In 1567, there appeared a book called Historia von D. Johann Faustin, often referred to German Faust book in Germany. This was published in Germany, which gave an account of the abominable life and death of Faustus. This story, this book actually spoke about the original Faustus. Christopher Marlowe actually was inspired by this book and he took an account of this book and told us the story of it. It was a plain moral tale, more fiction than fact. It sought to show the consequences of commitment to evil. This also has an angle of morality because it says that what we should do and what we should not do, what we should do in life and what are the consequences, what happens as a consequence of doing something good and what happens as a consequence of doing something bad. This is the moral question at the center of Dr. Faustus. But the Faustus of this narrative is committed to evil, but he has he has intellectual curiosity as well, the hallmark of Renaissance. So this is about a man who was very, very talented, but he wanted to know about things that no other person could ever know. And there is strong anti-pope bias in it. All this made the book immensely popular. You must remember that this was the age in which men really believed in magic, witchcraft, and the power of the devil. So this was the time when men actually believed in these kind of things, in magic, in witchcraft, and in the power of the devil. That devil is actually the person who will punish you if you do something wrong. It was the age of Reformation as well as the anti-papal statement. Anti-papal means people had developed a tendency to write against the church. Anti-papal means writing against the church and the establishment. Now let's look at the influences at work. After this brief look at the background, it is time now for a direct meeting with Dr. Faustus. The best way to understand and appreciate a text is to study it unaided, except sometimes by the annotations accompanying it. But a writer does not write in isolation. The times he lives in, the literary, cultural, and social and political environment of his times are bound to influence him in his writings. A familiarity with all this will enable you to identify the influences at work on the author in a particular work. It will give you the author's meaning in that work. When your meaning that comes through a simple reading of the text and the author's meaning come together, you have a fuller understanding of a literary text. So you have to understand that what are the inspirations behind Marlowe writing a book like this. Inspiration is, of course, things that he was always trying to develop the superhuman potentials within human beings. So he created a character like Tamburlaine, who had the desire to capture the whole world, who had the desire and the outlook to become the king of the world. Similarly, this person, Dr. Faustus, was talented and intellectual and a great scientist, but he had the ambition of knowing about life after death. That was also something that was problematic because you see, everything is connected to a kind of idea of divinity, that if there's God, then there's birth and death, and all those things are in the hands of the God. If a human being tries to actually get in between that, then that particular human being will have to face consequences. I'll move out a little bit. These things you can read by yourselves. With the text, where the text starts. Let's move to that portion only, which I was reading. First seen in retrospect, this is how the scene or the play actually begins. Let us look back at the first scene now and see what it reveals to us of Foster's characters, his hope and his ambition. The soliloquy is a kind of a second prologue, but to Foster's own design. Now, just give me 2 minutes and I'll look at the text of Foster's. The text that I'm presently sharing is the actual real text of Dr. Foster's, and you can see it begins by the introduction to the main characters of the play. So these are the main characters of the play. There is the Pope, the Cardinal of Lorraine, the Emperor of Germany, Duke of Vanhall, Faustus himself, Valdez, Cornelius. These are friends to Faustus. Wagner is a servant to Faustus. There is a clown. These are the characters of the play, basically. Yes, I'm reading something directly from the text, which is not present in the book that you are reading from the SL website. There's Robin, there's Ralph, there's Vinna, there's horse courser, a knight, an old man, scholars, friars, and attendants. There's also Duchess of Vanhall. Earlier we had Duke of Vanhall. We have the Duchess of Vanhall as well. There's Lucifer, which is the other name of Satan, the evil, the god of evil. Beelzebub, his close associate. Mephistopheles, another person who is equated to Lucifer. Good angel, evil angel, the 7 deadly sins, devils, spirits in the shape of Alexander the Great, Sparrow, and of Helen. These are the typical characters from the play. The tragical history of Dr. Faustus from the quarto of 1604. There enters a chorus. Now, what is a chorus? This is how the play begins. Chorus is a group of people singing a particular song or singing something that is related to the text. Chorus, not matching now in fields of Thersen, where Mars did mate the Carthaginians, not sporting in the dalliance of love, in courts of king, where state is overturned, nor is the pomp of proud, audacious deeds indeed intends our muse to vaunt heavenly verse. Only this, gentlemen, we must perform the form of Faustus' fortunes, good or bad. This is about the chorus is mostly about the introduction, the character of Faustus, how he is. He's a great person. He wants knowledge and wants to use knowledge for the benefit of people. But also, along with that, he has certain other desires of going ahead of his time. He's someone who has a lot of potential but wants to go ahead of his time and see a lot of other things. Foster's discovered in his study. Foster's settle thy studies, Foster's, and begin to sound the depth of that thou wilt profess, having commenced, be a divine issue, yet level at the end of every art, and live and die in Aristotle's work. Sweet analytics, tis thou hast ravished, been desire is finis logistics. So even if you find it difficult, don't worry. Just remember to read a good summary of this particular play, which will help you in answering questions. And remember, this play is about the ambition of Dr. Faustus, a person who wanted to know about life or who wanted to conquer death. Death is something that is the end of human life. He was one person who wanted to conquer death and know what was present after death or what happened to the human life after death. So this is very interesting that way. Physique, farewell, what is just to me? So I'm not going into a lot of details. You all will be confused. I'm just reading the first scene. After that, you can ask your questions. The soliloquy is a kind of a second prologue, but to Faustus's own design. He means to meditate his choice of profession and uses his power of argumentation to convince himself that his mastery over various branches of knowledge is inadequate to satisfy his curiosity and his ambitions of domination over the world around him. So he had a lot of knowledge. He was one person who had acquired a lot of knowledge from books and other resources, but he was also one person who was not really happy with this knowledge. He was not content with this knowledge. He wanted more. He wanted to get more. And this extra thirst of getting more and getting more actually destroyed his whole existence. Why? Because as I said, there's a moral situation within this world that life and death have been given by God, are things that has come to this earth given by God. So if you are trying to do things that are against the logic of God, then you will never be successful. That is why it is important to understand that God is someone who is binding this earth, and Faustus is trying to go against the system of the earth by trying to know what happens after death. And that in that way, he's actually going against the rule of God or the rule of divinity. And if you go against the rule of divinity, it was believed back then that you will always be punished. You can view Faustus's ambition from two different angles, depending upon how you look at his pride and presumption. If you look at the typical human attribute that makes one rise above one situation, you see that the making of a heroic tragedy in Dr. Faustus. So if you see a person who is trying to make the better of it, or who is trying to make a better meaning of life, that is a kind of a creation of a heroic tragedy of Dr. Faustus. Faustus wishes to gain curious knowledge of things no one has ever known. He wants power and wealth. He wants power and wealth. He wants to know things that no human knows. Remember, when the class began, I talked about Tamburlaine. Tamburlaine was a brave man, a brave king. So brave that no other king could actually match his bravery. Similarly, we find Dr. Faustus a person who is so knowledgeable that he wants to go ahead of all forms of knowledge and walk about it. The play then seems to be glorifying the return from Christianity to paganism. Christianity is one belief, paganism is the opposite belief of Christianity. And this seems to be very significant in the context of the age in which the play was written and staged, with the age of the Renaissance. We shall return to this point again when we study Dr. Faustus as a whole of its Renaissance spirit. But in the meanwhile, you could look at the elements of Renaissance in the first soliloquy and also in its later pronouncement and actions. We can say, even at this stage, that the play and its hero had a strong appeal for the audiences of that age. That he aimed at this appeal is evident from the fact that Marlowe twisted historical facts to let the audiences identify themselves with the hero, so that Faustus, a German, echoes the sentiments of the Englishmen of that age when he talks of Prince of Parma being chased from our land. You should also remember that Faustus' purely personal desires, a world of profit and delight, of power, of honor, are offset by his national aspirations. Nothing epitomizes the Renaissance spirit of Dr. Faustus more than the protagonist, yet art thou still Faustus and a man, where we find him wanting to break out of his limitations. This is the point that I'm trying to make again and again. Human limitations, to be sure, a desire that lies dormant in every human heart. So he's talking about limitations. Dr. Foster is one person who does not believe in limitations. He's an extremely knowledgeable person. He knows how to use his knowledge, and that is why he wants to use his knowledge in an extreme manner. He wants to know what happens to human beings after death, so that his knowledge crosses all limits. We all maybe at some point of time want to be more knowledgeable, want to study books, want to read and know more, but he is one person who does not set any limits to his knowledge. Now I'll stop here and I will also tell you to ask questions if you have anything in your mind before I move on to the next point. Remember, Dr. Faustus was a person who was extremely talented but wanted to know a lot about this life. Maybe sometimes knowing a lot without any limits can also be very, very risky. So if you have any questions at this point of time, please ask in the Q&A chat box. I'm giving you 2 to 3 minutes here. And then I'll again resume. If you have any questions, please ask. Yes, Pooja has asked, they are both from Elizabethan period. Yes, they are both from Elizabethan period. That's true. Good afternoon, everyone. So screen is not visible. I hope I'm visible to presently. I've switched off my camera. If you have any questions to ask, please ask at this point of time, and then you'll again be able to see me and hear me again. Please ask if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them. OK, let's see how many questions there are. For unit 1 and 2, whatever I have covered, the rest you yourselves have to cover, because everything cannot be taught in this 5 to 6 classes. So the basic things I have already told you. Rest is up to you that you have to cover. Everything cannot be covered in the class. What is the meaning of Renaissance? Renaissance means rebirth, something that happens again. Yes, paganism was something that was opposed to Christianity and Romanian people when Thucydides IV was the king. That's true. Who is Marlowe? Marlowe is the writer of this play. Christopher Marlowe is a dramatist and a great contemporary of William Shakespeare. Who is the character in this novel? This is not a novel, this is a play, this is a drama. The heroic character is, of course, Dr. Faustus himself. What is the crux of the story? This play is a tragedy. Yes, this is a tragedy. The crux of the story is Dr. Faustus was a great person. Dr. Faustus had great knowledge and he was a great intellectual, but he wanted to know about life and what happens to human beings after death. So he did not have those limits, and that is why he had to be punished. Yes, 2 classes could not be taken because there were technical issues that were not in my hand. So whatever has been covered, the rest you need to cover. If I get time, I will definitely cover, but it looks difficult. But it's your responsibility to read as well. I'm giving you another minute for any questions of yours. Please ask your questions. Okay, let's look at a few more questions. I think screen is not visible because I am not showing the screen. Please wait. Means the main character, whoever is the main character. So please explain who gave Chaucer the idea of writing Canterbury Tales. This I had already discussed in the Canterbury Tales class. Please see the book once again. This is the particular author was named Boccaccio, his book Decameron. I don't know whose name is this. It's showing anonymous. Sir, if anything is missed, then by reading the material, would we be able to understand? Yes, you should be able to understand because the material has been written in very easy words and easy writing. What is conjurers? People who belong to the court. Dr. Foster, this is a play, not a novel. Offline classes. I'm not sure. I'll ask in the office. If they provide me, I'll take offline classes. What is the meaning of Renaissance? Again and again, this question is coming up. Renaissance means rebirth. I'd already discussed this. So let's move ahead now. I hope everyone can see the screen once again. Now, conjuration. Conjuration is something that is related to magic. Something that happens in magic, something that is hard to believe, something that we can't understand. The conjuration. Set on his course, Faustus now recites magical formulas to conjure the devil. So what happens is that since he wants to know what happens after death, so he decides to sell his soul to the devil and he wants to know the best secret in exchange of that selling of the soul. The devil's name is Mephistopheles, also spelled Mephistopheles in some editions. Pleased with his success, Faustus tries to order him about, but Mephistopheles quite deflates Faustus when he tells him that he came not on his summons, but because he sensed a potential victim in him. There ensues a dialogue between the two in which Faustus asks him about Lucifer. Lucifer is Satan, the god of evil, the god of destruction, his fall and about hell. Mephistopheles tells Faustus critically that the cause of Lucifer's fall was aspiring pride and insolence. Insolence means when you become blind with your pride. Being proud about yourself is good, but when you become blind with your pride, it creates insolence. Insolence is always bad and it always will bring about your downfall and it will always create problems in your life. So do not be so proud that you cannot see the truth. And he himself and his other companions were unhappy spirits that fell with Lucifer, conspired against our God with Lucifer, and one forever damned with Lucifer. So he gives the example of Lucifer. He wants to know, Faustus wants to know, because these people know magic. So what was the reason why Lucifer had to die or Lucifer's fall? He's saying that Lucifer was extremely proud and Lucifer was becoming insolent. Because of his insolence, he had to have a tragic fall and he did not end up very well. As for hell, Mephistopheles says that to be out of heaven and to be deprived of its eternal joys and everlasting bliss is to be in hell. So heaven and hell, we know the concept. One is resided by God and the other is by the devil or the evil people. So now, because Mephistopheles is very happy, Mephistopheles is kind of a slave to Dr. Faustus. He is asking him different kinds of mysterious questions which normal human beings don't know the answer to. So he wants to know more and more. This quest for knowledge, actually, which began as a positive thing, became a negative thing gradually. Call it sheer determination or sheer cussedness, but Faustus is discouraged neither by the striking resemblance between between Lucifer's fate and his own if he renounced God, nor by a candid confession of unhappiness by Mephistopheles over loss of everlasting bliss of heaven. Now you see what happens in this play is that Dr. Faustus is the holder of unlimited knowledge. He has a lot of knowledge, but he wants to know more. He wants to know those things which no human knows. So he creates something, he does something which makes the others happy, and he gets Mephistopheles, who knows magic and other things, to tell him about the secrets of life, tell him about what had happened to people whose stories we do not know. So by Mephistopheles over loss of everlasting bliss of heaven, in fact, in a rather patronizing tone, he asked Mephistopheles to learn from him to bear one's losses with a manly fortitude. And with an incredible assurance, he asked Mephistopheles to go and tell Lucifer that he was willing to renounce God and surrender his soul to him in exchange for 24 years of voluptuousness and services of Mephistopheles. And with an incredible assurance, follow this line, he asked Mephistopheles to go to and tell Lucifer that he was willing to renounce God. Lucifer, sorry, Dr. Foster's goes to this extent that he says that I will leave God, I will stop believing in God, and I will surrender my soul to him, to Lucifer, to something that is bad, in exchange of 24 years of voluptuousness and services of Mephistopheles. He will sell his soul if he gets ultimate knowledge, which no human being ever got. So he goes to this extent that he wants to sell his soul. Soul is so integral to a human's life, to an influence in person of being, but he wants to sell that to give me whatsoever I shall ask, to tell me whatsoever I demand, to slay mine enemies and aid my friends, and always be obedient to my will. In a brief soliloquy after Mephistopheles' exit, Faustus' imagination goes wild as he contemplates becoming the emperor of the world. So he thinks that I will become the emperor of the world because I have got the knowledge. If Mephistopheles becomes my slave, and if Lucifer accepts my uh, demands, then I will get to know everything which no other human being in this world knows, making a bridge through the moving air over the ocean and joining the African continent to Spain. So he will become the emperor of the world, and he can also build a bridge in the moving air. Can anyone build a bridge in air? It's not possible, but he thinks this is his pride, this is growth of insolence that makes him blind towards the reality. So this is the point of destruction, which brings about the fall of Dr. Faustus over the ocean and joining the African continent to Spain. But in the fifth scene, doubts and despair over the choice of his course of action begin to assail him as he waits for Mephistopheles. And as in the first scene, the soliloquy is followed by the appearance of good angel and bad angel. So the appearance of good angel and bad angel happens. The constant tussle between what is good and what is bad happens between these two people. Now I will skip a bit here and reach to some of the section. Exploitation of power, how he uses power to a maximum possible extent. Every human being has this desire for power, but Dr. Foster's ambitions and this exploitation of power is something which is unbelievable. So we need to also understand what is power and how he exploits this. So please read page number 10, whatever you can see in the screen, the exploitation of power from scene 8 to scene 17, you need to read this. Just read this three sections. This first paragraph, second and third. Read page number 10, whatever is visible on your screen. I'm giving you 2 to 3 minutes here, then I'll again resume. Please read everyone. Okay, so now let's see what is the connection between power and other resources. So let us glance at these sins very quickly because they hardly involve any subtleties of meaning. The chorus, the first point where the play begins. The chorus comes in again to describe Foster's journey across the cosmic space, thus overcoming the constraints on staging events across long spans of time and space. From a secular point of view, he still enjoys our sympathy and admiration because when you first get to see Dr. Okay, sorry, there was a power cut, so I got disconnected. I'll just share the file once again. I hope you all can see the file once again. So the first scene where Dr. Foster is introduced, the chorus comes in again to describe Foster's journey across this cosmic space, thus overcoming the constraints of staging events across long spans of time and space. From a secular point of view, he still enjoys our sympathy and admiration, for although he has taken the devil's help in his adventures, he has done nothing diabolical as far as such so far, as if to counterbalance the image of Faustus, the protagonist as a clown and a pretty and petty-minded, cruel, practical joker. So when we are introduced to Faustus as a character in the first scene, the chorus, you remember, is introduced to us in a way that he's a heroic character. He's someone who is very, very good and he knows how to work in this system. And he's one person who is an intellectual who is aspiring for knowledge, and he's someone who is trying to make a better meaning of life. So scenes 8 and 9 occur in Pope's chamber at Rome. Faustus, accompanied by Mephistopheles, enters the Pope's chamber. Pope, I hope you know, is a senior person in the church who works in the service of the god and watches the pageant of the Pope. Raymond, King of Hungary, and the procession of monks pass by, and Bruno, the rival Pope, led in chains. As desired by Faustus, Mephistopheles frees Bruno and puts him on a fast-paced horse on way to Germany. In the next scene, Faustus becomes invisible. Now you see Faustus gets a lot of power. Faustus takes the help of magic, with science the coupling of magic takes place. Thanks again to Mephistopheles, and plays tricks upon the Pope and his guests at dinner, snatching morsels of food, making wine goblets vanish, and even striking the Pope in the face, and thus causing consternation in the assembly. He and Mephistopheles throw fireworks among them and beat the friars away. He and Mephistopheles throw fireworks among them and beat the friars away. So they have power, they are making fun of these people, and they try to play with the other people. I'll skip it here. Go to some other scenes. The damnation of Faustus. We all know by now that whoever wants to go against this divine logic of death, life and death, that someone who is born will someday die, will have to face the damnation or will be punished in the end. The damnation of Faustus, the last two scenes of the play, brings us to the close of Faustus's life. It is an altogether different Faustus that we meet now. Obviously, the genius of Marlowe is again at work here. The Faustus who took delight in clowning, swindling, getting sadistic pleasure out of others' suffering, who took offense at petty offenses, has given way to a Faustus in the state of spiritual despair in the approach of his last hour. We see a magnanimous Faustus who wills out his material possessions to Wagner, his student. We see now a magnanimous means a kinder Faustus. Earlier, he was one person who was power hungry. Earlier, he had understood, or he thought, that no one would be able to actually challenge him in this whole world. No one would actually give him a balance of his taste. So Faustus in the final stages is in a situation of repentance, or we see here a kinder Faustus. We see a magnanimous Faustus. Magnanimous is more kinder and more better, who wills all his material possessions to Wagner, his student. But do we see the irony of this magnanimity? We do not see the irony. This is how the end comes. That Faustus, who is a great person, who is a person who seeks knowledge, is at the end being killed, or he has to face death because of his unwanted desires. He wanted desires which were very, very bad, or which were against this whole logic of divinity, that someone who is born will have to die. Faustus is so human again as he talks to the scholars who come to visit him. They would like to see Helen of Greece, the most beautiful lady in the world, and Faustus readily obliges them. Helen, or rather her apparition, passes over the stage. So Helen is someone who was considered to be the most beautiful lady in this whole world. Because of her, there was a great battle of Troy. But even as late as this Faustus had a chance to work for his salvation, an old man even in and exhorts him to leave his damned art, this magic that will charm thy soul to hell and quite bereave thee of salvation. So at the end, Faustus tries to be a good man because he has understood by now that no one can actually go ahead of this kind of uh, divinity, because someone who's born will have to die. And if you are trying to go against this logic, then you will be punished. So if I move ahead of this, I'll go to the next section. But before I move on to the next section, I'm giving you again 2 to 3 minutes. You can ask your questions in the Q&A chat box. Please ask your questions, whatever you have. Please ask your questions, whatever you have. I'm giving you 3 minutes again. Lucifer, I had already said, is Satan. The other name of Satan is Lucifer. He is the god of evil. Someone who does all kinds of bad things is Lucifer. Mephistopheles, a slave of Dr. Faustus, who knows all magical things and gives him supreme power of this world. You can already hear my voice. If you have any questions, I'll wait for another 2 minutes before moving on. Okay, there are lots of questions. Let's see. Ascendance and voluptuousness means being young always. What is the actual meaning of course? Mephistopheles is the name of the character. There cannot be any meaning. Please follow what I'm saying. Who is Faustus actually? You people don't follow the classes. Faustus is the main character of the play. Who else is Faustus? Now look at what I'm showing here. Faustus as a tragedy. See, I'm telling you briefly that Dr. Faustus is a tragedy of a person who has a lot of ambitions. A person with a lot of ambitions who wants to look into the matters of life even after one has passed away or after death. So it becomes a problem because we are all connected with this divine plan. Someone who's born will always die. So he wants to break that plan and he suffers. Faustus is a tragedy, the final point from today's class. The monologue brings together the two aspects of the play, the heroic and the morality. The last scene reenacts the fall of Lucifer due to his roaring pride. So if you're proud about yourself, if you're not controlling yourself, and if you think that you're invincible, if you think that no one can do anything to you, or you can do something without any limits, then of course there'll be problems for you. Austin reenacts the fall of Lucifer due to his roaring pride, which has been hinted at in the exchanges between Faustus and Mephistopheles in scene 3. But Faustus, like Lucifer, has aroused our admiration as well. He is at the same time a tragic hero, someone who is so knowledgeable, someone who is a worshipper of knowledge, but he has to have a tragic end because he tries to cross the limit of knowledge. But Faustus, like Lucifer, has aroused our admiration in his challenge to that inexorable law that spares none. As the time ticks away, we are finally brought face to face with the struggle between the heroic will and destiny ranged against it. Destiny wins. Whatever happens in this world, you cannot go against a system which has been created that at the basic system of the earth. Destiny wins. Alice Femror observes that the tragedy of Faustus results from the predestination of man to destruction by some indeterminate forces, symbolized in the devils, and this implies a satanic rather than a moral world order. Marlowe sees the world order as necessary evil in which the spirit of man is set against the universe. The monologue comes to reveal the littleness of man in this universe. In the heroic or romantic view of the tragedy of Faustus, pride becomes an assertion of individualism and presumption and of resoluteness. So you can be proud of your achievements, but you have to limit yourself as well. You have to follow certain rules. The person who does not follow these rules is bound to meet an end and will have to follow a tragic fall. So the problem with Dr. Foster is that he had ambitions. He had good ambitions. He was a knowledgeable person. He was a worshipper of knowledge, but he did not know where to stop. There has to be a limit to knowledge as well. So you are thinking of gaining certain things which others cannot. You want to know things which happens after death. Then that will of course go against the logic of nature and you will be punished. The same thing happened with Dr. Faustus. So we'll conclude the class here. If you find it very, very difficult, which most of you might be having, just read a very good online summary of Dr. Faustus, and whatever you don't understand, you bring it up as a form of question in the next class. In the next class, we shall be covering 12th night, and everyone should follow that as well. For Dr. Foster's, please read a good online summary and it will become easier. Whatever points you need to remember for the questions as for the examinations, I will tell you. So thank you all of you and have a good day. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm giving you the last 2 minutes. You can ask them as well. The others who do not have questions can leave the class. Thank you all of you.